Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Eugene's May 1st, 2026 program, Law Day, Building Better Citizens. My name is Alyssa Gilbert, President of the City Club of Eugene, and it's my honor to welcome you to another of the many forums we've held here since 1990 in the name of our mission to build community vision through open inquiry. May 1st is celebrated globally as International Workers' Day, honoring labor movements with marches, demonstrations, and rallies for worker rights. In 1958, U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower established Law Day as a day of national dedication to the principles of government under law. Our laws about free speech and our culture of civic engagement allow us also to honor this May Day with a national strike as a sign of resistance to government activities that many believe are restricting rights. It is fitting that City Club is hosting today a program about law and how we assure that traditions supporting rule of law are handed down. We would love for you to browse our past programs at cityclubofeugene.org or our YouTube or Facebook. Please consider becoming a member if you'd like to support our rigorous volunteer work as Oregon's only city club that provides weekly forums. There are many ways to partner with us, and I'd like to thank our sponsors. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, and act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. Thank you to Lane County for their generous support and to our web host, 9 Planets, whose website support is critical to our functioning, making it easy to sign up as a member or to learn more about us. A quick reminder, please silence all cell phones. And with that, I turn the mic over to the coordinator of today's program and chair of City Club's program committee, Joel Corin.
I just found out I'm going to be chair again next year, and they've offered to double my salary. Those kids don't know nothing about civics. How many of you have heard that? And it appears from a study done by the Chamber of Commerce Foundation that 70% of the people in this country are deficient in their knowledge of just basic civics, 3 branches of government, stuff like that. So today we're going to try and talk about how we can repair that. Law Day, Building Better Citizens. I could spend pretty much the hour outlining the qualifications of these 5 people, but I will stop because you want to have a program. The first speaker will be the Honorable Martha L. Walters, a retired Supreme Court Justice in Oregon. She was appointed to the court by Governor Kolonguski in 2006, served for a period of time as an Associate Justice, and then was elected as the chief. This followed an extensive career as a trial lawyer, doing labor law and taking some cases to the Supreme Court. When COVID-19 hit, Walters led the successful statewide effort to keep the courts open and safe with her rallying cry, "Courts can." She retired in December 22 and is working with projects like this, like the Civic Learning Project, in order to increase the civic knowledge of our folks. The second speaker will be Nikki Darling. She is the Southwest Regional Programs Manager for the Civics Learning Project. You'll hear a lot more about that. It's a 40-year-old organization that connects the legal community, civic leaders, and educators in an effort to foster civic learning. The third speaker will be Elizabeth Yvette Williams. She's a 17-year-old college student. She was involved in certain BIG, Blacks in Government programs, where she was awarded the most likely to be future president. Can you start now? And in every bio of her, there's the line, she hopes to become a future federal judge. So watch out. She'll be here. The fourth speaker is Jenny Jonak, who's the founder and principal of Jonak Law Group, PC. She does a lot of work in federal court. She's a graduate of UVA Law School and undergraduate. She has worked for Morgan Lewis, a national firm, and at that firm, she was the head of the pro bono committee. And big firms do a lot in pro bono work. She is a member of the 4J School Board, and we'll talk about what is going on in the schools. And our last, but certainly not least speaker, is the past president of City Club, Marty Wilde. He's a retired Air Force colonel, decorated combat veteran, and judge advocate with 25 years of military legal experience. He teaches a course in how to become active or radical at the University of Oregon. So with that, I'll ask the chief to take the podium.
Thank you, Joel, and thank you to the City Club president who told us that today, in addition to being such a beautifully green Friday, is Law Day, and that President Dwight D. Eisenhower established this May 1st as Law Day back in 1958. The president sought to highlight what makes our system of government distinct, that it is grounded in fairness, in individual rights, and in the rule of law, not the will of those with power. It is important to me to be able to talk to you about Law Day, and that's because I know that you care about and are leaders in our community. Without you and a shared commitment to uphold the principles of Law Day, we will not have the system of government that we have envisioned. At its core, the rule of law just means that no one is above the law and that the same rules apply to everyone. It's an abstract concept with tangible, everyday consequences. It protects your jobs, your families, and your future. We take it for granted, just like we take for granted the air we breathe and the ground we walk on. But when we think about it, we rely on the rule of law, just like we rely on the air we breathe in every minute of every day. We expect that the contracts we sign will be honored, that drivers will stop at red lights, that the money we deposit in our bank accounts will be available to us. The fabric of our society is stitched with the rule of law. When rules are predictable, businesses are willing to invest and create jobs. When rules are predictable, families can plan for their children and their futures. We take the rule of law for granted, but I want to tell you that it really requires maintenance. We must give it. We've got to all give it our care and attention. And that means all of us. We can't leave it to lawyers or to judges. That's why civics education and civic participation is so important. It's essential, and you'll hear more about it a little bit later today. But I want to focus my time on the importance of courts in our collective effort. Courts hold people accountable based on the law and the facts, not politics, not public pressure, not shifting public opinion. So it is absolutely critical that our courts be strong and that they be independent. Judicial independence is not about protecting judges. It's about protecting the people who rely on judges to be fair and impartial. Protecting judicial independence preserves the ability of judges to make decisions without fear and without favor. Not every decision will be popular. That's not the role of the courts, we know that. What matters is that the decisions are reached through a fair, consistent, and impartial process. That is what allows people to accept the outcomes, even if they don't agree. And that is what builds trust, not only in our courts, but in our entire system of justice. When courts are able to operate independently, they help safeguard rights, they resolve conflicts peacefully, and they provide a balance within our constitutional system. If the independence of our courts is questioned, or if they are weakened, then public confidence in the fairness of our system can erode, and that affects all of us. Erosion of trust can happen gradually, and if and when it does, everyday life can be less fair, less safe, and less predictable. If people do not trust our system of laws, they will be less likely to follow them, and if people do not respect the law, then it is power that will prevail. I want to tell you a story. Joel mentioned a case in the Supreme Court, and it's a story about a golfer who some of you may know or have heard of. His name is Casey Martin, and he has a disability that prevents him from walking the golf course. When the PGA, the Professional Golf Association, refused to let Casey participate in its golf tournaments because he had to use a cart, Casey challenged that action under the Americans with Disabilities Act. The case was tried here in Eugene in the Federal District Court, and the judge who heard the case was not a golfer. Golfers asked, can the judge be fair? Will the judge be fair? But the judge also was not a person with disabilities. The judge did not align himself with either side in the case. He did his job to listen, to consider the law, to articulate the basis for his decision, and it was upheld in the United States Supreme Court. There were two sides. Yes, it's fabulous. There were two sides to that argument, and it was a close question. But in the end, thinking back on it, what mattered most for our purposes today is not whether Casey won or lost, but that sports organizations and athletes of many different abilities could move forward knowing that the law that applied to them would be the law that applied to other organizations and people. Law Day gives us a minute to reflect and pause and think original vision. The strength of our republic depends not only on the principles we affirm, but on whether we are willing to work to uphold them consistently and together. Onward.
Happy Law Day, City Club. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about the Civics Learning Project today, mostly because I hope that what I tell you can begin to set your sights on tomorrow. That's what it does for me every day I do the work, and I believe it's what it does for students and volunteers that we work with. As Joel said, Civics Learning Project is a 40-year-old nonprofit organization that networks the legal community, civic leaders, and educators in service of civics education in K-12 schools. In 2021, the Oregon State Legislature unanimously passed the Civics Education Bill, and this graduating year of 2026 is the first year that all seniors will have had a semester of civics education as a graduation requirement. But in schools that are overflowing and under-resourced, a legislative mandate is only the beginning of the work. The real question is how to make civics education so meaningful that it empowers students to see themselves both now and in the future as active participants in their community and as bold caretakers of democracy. For decades, the Civics Learning Project has fostered regional competition-style programs like We the People, where students compete in simulated congressional hearings to demonstrate their understandings of the Constitution. And I can just say as a side note, they would put all of us to shame, with the exception of maybe Judge Walters. Additionally, we have a mock trial, and that is where students role play simulated court proceedings, developing their communication and advocacy skills, as well as a more active understanding of our justice system. The Civics Learning Project also supports teachers who want to have their students develop what are called community action projects, where students research something in their community that they would like to change for the better, move the needle, if you will, toward a more just and healthy community. This is different from a traditional research project because a community action project requires students to move from identifying an issue all the way through to the policy development level, ultimately learning how and where policy development takes place. The Civics Learning Project has helped teachers bring students to city halls and school boards to advocate for policy change. This hands-on work of bringing students to the spaces of power and decision-making is one way, not the only way, but one important way to help them better understand that there really is no gap at all between their ideas and making the world work more smoothly and justly. As the Senior Regional Program Manager for the Civics Learning Project, I get to see this work happening in classrooms and in civic institutions daily. I get to see inspiring teachers and enthusiastic students working with community members and civic leaders, and I get to see young people responding to the work and experiences of folks who have created networks and pathways for upholding and strengthening our democratic systems. It is why I am optimistic about tomorrow. I get to meet students like Elizabeth Yvette, who's here with me today, with all of us. Elizabeth is a homeschooled early high school graduate who participated in mock trial on the team at South Eugene High School for 2 years. And during that run, she won 3 prestigious awards for Outstanding Attorney, Most Valuable Participant, and Certificate of Outstanding Achievement. So, if I've learned anything as an educator and in my work for the Civics Learning Project, it's that I should be quiet and let the students speak. So I'm going to hand my podium over to Elizabeth to talk about her participation in the Civics Learning Project mock trial competitions and how she envisions herself as a future leader in upholding our precious democracy. Elizabeth.
So as she said, I participated in a mock trial. I participated in it for 2 years. Oh, pardon me. So I participated in mock trial for 2 years, during which time I had the opportunity to complete 3 different competitions. Prior to beginning mock trial, I knew I wanted to work in law and I wanted to be a judge. I decided that when I was 14. However, I wouldn't say that I had a clear sense of direction, and I wouldn't say that I had a clear understanding of the legal system. Participating in mock trial definitely helped me see what a future in the law would look like. It helped me understand the system that I wanted to be a part of and the role I would have to uphold. It also strengthened my commitment to being a judge versus a lawyer or something similar. I realized for the first time that rather than being the person who stood up and argued a case and tried to win, I wanted to be the one who was the arbitrator, who ensured that the process was fair. Participating in mock trial also gave me the opportunity to meet other people who also wish to uphold democracy and participate in the legal system. I met so many incredible people, and my conversations with those people taught me a lot. I learned about how the legal system works and what being a part of that meant, what that kind of commitment would entail. Participating in mock trial has been incredible, and I hope that many more students have the opportunity to do just that.
Hi, my name is Jenny Jonak, and I serve on the 4J school board, and I also have several students in the public schools here. So I get to see firsthand some of the work that Nikki has talked about, where we're helping to teach students and youth not just the academics about how the system works, but to make it feel practical for them and to make it feel like something that they can have trust in, that they can participate in. And we know that earlier participation in civic processes is more likely to lead to someone being a lifelong engager with civic processes. So project-based learning around civics is incredibly important. I've seen firsthand with my own kids and in the schools when I go to watch presentations. We have mock trials. We have a system where kids will often pick, a politician or a decision maker, and they will set up a proposal for that person. Sometimes it's done by way of letter at the middle school level. We're seeing, I actually have one student right now who's been working on a letter to Governor Kotek about data centers and the environmental impact. At the high school level, in addition to the mock trials, we'll also see situations where at the end of the year, kids will pick a project that's important to them, some sort of policy change that they want to see. And this is really important because one misunderstanding I often see at all ages, all levels, is who basically is in charge of implementing systems and who acts as policymakers. So for example, on the school board, our job is really centers around policy. And so these students will work on something that they think should be a policy change. For example, last year, one of the presentations I attended was all about why schools should start a little bit later. And they had, different scientific studies to back up the circadian rhythms and why it would be beneficial to students. And it's really great to see because these students will often take both sides of something where they will have a team. And one person on the team has the job of finding the weak points in a policy issue. And I was really impressed at all the different levels where the kids had the project and they talked about not only what the policy change should be, what the obstacles and barriers were, what the costs would be. The way they went about it was really impressive. And so I think civics, projects like what Nikki has been heading are so important. It's equally important that we take into account the voices of those that we don't hear from. So throughout, a democracy, we want to hear from as many people as possible. And one of the other hats I wear, I was recently elected as the president of the Asian American Council of Oregon. And one thing that we will be aiming to do over the next few years is increase civic engagement in the Asian American community. And I think not just with this community, but with communities broadly, making sure, as Judge Walters said, that you have trust in the system. And that takes on several different components. It includes a sense of belonging, of feeling like your voice is valued. And I think that's important both at the youth and adult level. So that's an important component to teaching in the schools. Also making sure that you can see yourself in the system, that you're identified in the system, that you're being asked to trust in and to participate in. And so sometimes identifying barriers, looking at how we tackle those barriers to engagement, who are the trusted allies that can help as educators, intermediaries, or just someone willing to be with you in the process. Over the past couple of years, some of you have probably read in the news about burglaries that have targeted the homes of Asian Americans locally and throughout Oregon. One of the things that the Asian Council stepped up to do was to try to get people to increase reporting. That isn't something we necessarily think of automatically with civic engagement, but it's really important because that kind of data is not only important for law enforcement, but it helps feed the decisions that our local politicians make. We also worked on some legislative work around trying to narrow the gap with some of these, to try to address some of these burglaries, and having a number of people from the community testify for the first time during the short session this past year was really heartwarming. And so I'm going to tie it up to make sure I leave room for other speakers, but I would say an important part of civic engagement is not just the education component, but making sure that you're really enabling and looking for the voices and making sure that you are as comprehensive as possible in getting that engagement.
Hi, I'm Marty Wilde, for those of you who don't know me. I'm pleased to see 2 active candidates, I think at least 4 current or former office holders, and innumerable members of the audience who currently or used to serve on boards and commissions, which is also a very important role, even if you don't want to be on the ballot yourself. We definitely rely on those folks to do a lot of things. I do wear a lot of hats, and so I am obligated to start with a mandatory disclaimer that the views I express herein are not necessarily those of the Department of the Air Force, Navy, Defense, or the University of Oregon. I do teach a class, Law 301, titled Youth and Social Change. I call it So You Want to Be a Revolutionary. The course asks a simple civics question. What does it take for young people to actually change the world that they live in? We run historically 2 tracks at once, one for historical youth movements and one for how-to. How do you become an activist? How do you write a speech? How do you organize a protest march? They organize into what we call revolutionary cells of 4, because an essential part of any movement is working with other people. They engage in a variety of activities, including structured debates, mock testimony, and policy briefings as a stand-in for actually doing those things in real life. I thought it was funny when we organized this, we all, on our own, mentioned that project-based learning was a critical part of civics. It's not just about memorizing the branches of government. It's about finding something you care about that serves as the vehicle for empowering yourself and learning about the system. And so the first 2 weeks of my class, students choose a topic, and they range from anything from sports gambling to culturally appropriate mental health care at the college level. So they choose a topic, and then they write a policy brief, among other things, which says, here's the legal background on it, here's what's going on right now. And then they write a campaign plan, one with a SMART goal, a realistic, achievable goal, and theory of change, stakeholder and coalition maps, and a media strategy that could actually be launched. And some do. Not required to, but some do actually execute on their plans. I would say there is a big challenge. In the legislature, when I was a state legislator, I found that some of my most interesting conversations were not with members of my own party, but with people who had, from the other party, who had very different views on the subjects. And one of the things that a recent Yale report identified as lacking in their community was viewpoint diversity, intellectual diversity. I see that. The students aren't apathetic. They all are very passionate. Unfortunately, they're all passionate in the same direction, often progressively to the left. Now, on a personal level, I don't mind that, but you miss something. I am reminded, Jane Kramer's a political science professor, and I spoke on a panel, the question of which was basically war powers. And so inevitably, we ended up talking about the Iran conflict. And she expressed her view very strongly, that it was the wrong thing to do. But I said, well, okay, I'm a lawyer. You know, is it a legal thing to do? Was the first question I would ask. Do I agree with her that it was a bad idea? Yeah, in my personal capacity, I do. As a lawyer, do I think we had the legal right to do it? Yes. They said, well, there was no threat against us. Well, there was a threat against Israel. Hezbollah, which is supported by Iran, routinely attacks my friends in Israel. And we are entitled, as a legal matter, to join with Israel to do that. Now, you may or may not like that, but that's the law. And, in terms of viewpoint diversity, even though Jane and I agreed that it was probably not the best thing to do, the viewpoint diversity we had there was, hey, from her perspective as a political scientist, that was her lens. And from my lens, it was, is it lawful? It might be awful, but is it lawful? Polarization is a real problem for these students. The last time I taught this class, we had really one outspoken conservative student in the class. And what I noticed was every time he spoke up, people did not try to engage with his arguments. The other students didn't. And we do a lot of discussions in this class. What they did was pile on about how he was wrong. What they were trying to do was not to convince him. What they were trying to do was to shame him and to prove to their friends just how ideologically pure they were. Okay? That's not that useful a skill. That is not civics education. Civics education is learning how to engage with smart people on the other side that you might just disagree with. And so I really took them to task in that one. I'm a little sad that this current class I'm teaching doesn't have an outspoken conservative. And it is very difficult to get them to think about what the reasonable counter-arguments are to theirs. So for instance, on the student group that's doing mostly Native American culturally appropriate mental health care at the university, well, who could be opposed to that? Well, it's not that we oppose culturally appropriate mental health care, it's that, is that the right way to do it? Could we set aside hiring, and say only a Native American mental health provider may take this position? Well, no, that wouldn't be legal. Is there another way to do it that doesn't involve spending more money, which comes from the students for that service? So the question was not whether this was a value. In fact, I think almost everybody would say it's important to have culturally appropriate mental health care. The question was, what would a reasonable person oppose their position on, and how would they explain it? And taking that into account, how might that change their perspective going forward? I do require them to play devil's advocate, so to speak. I do assign them every class. We have a debate of one kind or another, and they get assigned their role because it's very important that they see things from the other perspective. And then I usually switch them the next class. So if they advocated for one thing in the past, they advocate for something else. One of the better arguments was whether nonviolent direct action was the only appropriate method for a movement to make progress. And there are a lot of people who wanted to say, yes, absolutely, that was the right thing to do. And I said, well, yeah, if you look at the civil rights movement, you could definitely come to that conclusion. Hard to come to that conclusion when you're in the middle of it. After the one I give them is the Freedom Riders. And after the Aniston incident, where several people were injured, the adults in the movement said, we're going to knock it off. And it was the students, Diane Nash, a young woman who wasn't African American, and said, no, we need to continue. That was not an obvious choice at the time, but indeed, it was a choice that they made and went forward. But I would say, would that have been the right choice for Jewish people in Germany in 1939? No. These are legitimate questions. I'm a retired military officer. Fundamentally, I believe that sometimes violence is the right answer, ideally defensively. But that's a very difficult concept for people to get, especially young people. But it's important that they consider it. In conclusion, I just say that the thing I probably like most is that they need to collaborate across their differences and to go out and find people who disagree with them and address those arguments. If our students can build a campaign with people who disagree with them and persuade a skeptical audience, then they're learning the core civic skill that our democracy needs most. And my hope is that we may continue to build that through the programs we've discussed today and organizations like City Club. Thank you.
we on? All right. Sir, please.
Charlie Quinn, City Club member since 2002. I'm interested in two issues that was mentioned at the beginning and the end. One, how can we exercise the duties and rights we have to ensure that power doesn't overtake things in this moment? And two, how do we engage in more courageous conversations with people with differing backgrounds or hierarchy of values? I don't think we necessarily have different values, but usually we have different ordering of those values. So any of you can address that, those two.
Who wants to start?
I'll start. Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things is I was chief rule of law in Afghanistan in 2011. And one of the fundamental principles of the rule of law is that the rules have to apply to everybody, including the government. And what I was trying to teach my Afghan counterparts, or trying to tell them, is you have to agree that the government will be limited by its own laws. And they were not interested. Just as the Diem regime in Vietnam, the Karzai regime in Afghanistan was not interested in being subject to laws. And so the way I engaged them to say is, we're leaving. It took a lot longer than I thought, but we are leaving. And you're going to have to do this. And if you don't change, exactly the same thing is going to happen here as did in Vietnam, because the government did not become something worthy of the people. And so, how did I engage across that? I was direct and honest with them, probably to a fault, to be honest, and said, this is going to be your problem. You think of it as our problem, but this is going to be your problem. And they didn't learn. So you can't always win, but I think if you're direct and honest and respectful, people usually will give you a hearing.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I'll address the issue of courageous conversations with folks. First of all, I would just say that, in this room, for the most part, we are all over 18 years old. The courageous conversations that we are struggling to have among each other are the same conversations that we not only ask, but actually demand that students in classrooms have every single day. So for one thing is to kind of step back with that and recognize that we are asking young people to listen to each other, to see each other as human beings in ways that we ourselves are not exercising on a daily basis. I think in terms of having that conversation and beginning that conversation, it is about a value premise. And I think to the extent we can sit down with someone and say, what are the big abstract values that matter to you? Safety, security, love, right? These are abstract things. And then we have the discussion about what are the ways that we can behave in the world, the policies that we can engage in the world that actualize those values. Because we, I think, can get to a place where we can say, wow, safety is important to you, it's important to me too. What is it that makes you feel unsafe? And then I can say, okay, this is what makes me feel unsafe. And we can begin from there. But if we can find that shared value premise, the thing that we feel like is important to actualize in the world, then we have a goal for developing a policy around that value premise that's not about whether my party wins or your party wins, or my church wins or your church wins. It's really about, can we create a society that is safe for everyone? Can we create a society that is prosperous for everyone? Those kinds of things.
Well, Jenny?
Is this work? Okay. I would say another thing, in answer to your first question, calling something out when we're not abiding by the rule of law, not normalizing it. It's really tempting in this day and age to think that the line in the sand is continuously moving. Resist that normalization and hold things accountable. Call out what is not working and don't just take it for granted. I think that's really important. In terms of courageous conversations, we actually have had classes in our schools that are called just that. And they're fantastic. They're really important to be able to discuss differing points of views and be hard on, to disagree on issues but not demonize the person behind them. And I think the more opportunities we have in a civic arena to be able to do work side by side towards a common goal with people from all backgrounds of all beliefs, I think the more we can start to see that someone doesn't have to share every single viewpoint of ours in order for us to work together successfully for the benefit of our community.
Chief, do you have anything? President Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. Alyssa Gilbert. Love getting to say that I am City Club of Eugene's first ever Gen Z president. Wow, applause. Thank you. A few of you kind of touched on the notion that a lot of folks in other generations don't really see my generation as being as educated, as involved, caring as much. I look around at my peers, and they're deeply involved, deeply paying attention, and like I'm here. And so I wonder if you all have thoughts on where that notion is coming from and what we can do to sort of change that mindset that young people are not out there doing the work.
Who wants to be first? Marty?
I'm going to try to paraphrase here. I think it was Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, who wrote something about the activist lives in between what is and what should be. And I think often the challenge older people have with hearing from younger people is the lack of acknowledgement of what is. And they jumping right to what should be. And I think when you have more experience, it's not an excuse to say you have more experience, but it is to say, okay, well, how are you going to address that? The other thing I would say, I kind of neglected this earlier, was, in my 5 years of being in office and campaigning, I think I knocked on 20,000 doors. And I said, the most important thing you can do when you're going to have the kind of conversation like this is ask an open question first. So when somebody came to the door, I didn't say, hi, I'm Marty Wilde, I'm running for office, vote for me. I'd say, I'm running for state representative or judge. What issues do you have? What do you care about? And then, ideally, they would tell me something I could talk about. Sometimes it was something that was either local or federal and I couldn't do anything about it, but most often it was something that they cared about. So you got to give a little to get a little, I think, in these conversations. And I think, to be fair to your question, yes, we're bad at giving what we need to give to the younger generation and saying right from the start, yes, we agree that things aren't as they should be. Let's talk about that.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
I think that when it comes down to it, the primary issue is miscommunication and a lack of transparency, so to speak. Older people tend to move in their own circles, and, well, at the risk of offending most of the people in the room, get stuck in their ways, right? I think that younger people tend to see the older generations as a bit of a burden, something to be overcome or ignored, not people to be learned from and worked with. So that leads to a situation where the two groups aren't communicating with one another, and so the older people might think, oh, they're not doing anything, because you don't hear about it. How would you? It's the younger people who are doing things with each other, and they're showing up to the events that they throw, the speeches that they make. You aren't hearing about it. So that's where that comes from, I would say.
Anyone else?
I would also just say, go to places where young people are, to echo what Elizabeth said. As an educator, I used to be a little flabbergasted when a parent would come for a student-teacher conference and they'd say, wow, I haven't been in a school since I graduated from school. And so they come for parent-teacher conferences, and then when their kids are gone and leave the school system, they no longer go to schools. They're no longer in spaces where young people are. So I have plenty of my business cards to hand out. I would love for all of you to volunteer and come and work in our schools, and I know our teachers would love that as well.
Mary?
Hi, Mary Layton, City Club member and former president. It's the family business. I have a story time. What I would love to hear is examples in your experience of when you have negotiated to a space that you both say yes to. Because sometimes I feel like we're always debating, am I going to be right or are you going to be right? And sometimes, even in matters of law, it could be an interpretation. How can we so I would love examples of times when you started out disagreeing about something with somebody that was important to you for one reason or another, and you found a place where you could move forward together.
Who wants to respond? Jenny?
Yeah, I go back to what Nikki was talking about, where many of us share the same basic values that we want to see, affordable housing, public safety, good education. We may have differences in what that looks like or how to get there. And so I think sometimes the conversations are contrasting the different ways that we get there, and perhaps there's a compromise in combining elements of both to get there. What I run into more frequently, serving on the school board, isn't really a difference in even value or not even necessarily how to get there, but a scarcity of resources and where you're going to prioritize that. So for example, if we have to make a cut, sometimes there's an assumption that, that we don't value whatever it is that's being cut. And that's not the case. A lot of times what we're dealing with is just finite resources and how to spread that out to benefit our constituents as much as possible. So in those situations, I would say you may wind up working with somebody else who has a different view of what should be prioritized, but you both fundamentally come to a compromise on this is the core part of our mission, and in a situation with diminishing resources, this is what we have to prioritize because it's going to have the biggest impact on students.
Anyone else?
I'll do a quick one on two bills in the legislature. One was Cedric Hayden wanted to make sure that veterans had dental care. Cedric is a Republican and a dentist, and the VA, unless you're 100% disabled, does not provide dental care. So we wanted to figure that out. And so, a Republican wants to talk about human services, we're going to have that conversation. And so we ended up putting, to make it, fair and reasonable and cost, we ended up putting a income cap on it, fairly high income cap. And we worked with the dental organizations to make that happen. So, it came forward as essentially a conservative bill and ended up as something we could all live with. The other one unfortunately I didn't see come to fruition when I was in the legislature, but here they have now. It was Mark Owens, who's a conservative legislator from Eastern Oregon. And the thing you need to know about Ontario, Oregon is if only people from Ontario, Oregon consumed the marijuana that is sold in Ontario, Oregon, every man, woman, and child would have to smoke about $10,000 of marijuana in a given year. So I think we may reasonably say that perhaps people from Idaho are buying marijuana and taking it back over the border. And so there is a 3% cap on the local option tax for marijuana. And Mark said, look, we want to raise it to 10%. And I said, yeah, anytime a Republican wants to talk about raising taxes, again, I'm going to have that conversation. And the pushback we got was from the industry, and it's true that if you raise taxes too much, then it tends to go into the black market, and the industry has an interest in keeping it in the legal market. And also, people from Portland said, well, we think they should only be able to spend that on rehab. And I was like, well, if you want to have a local option tax and spend it on rehab, knock yourself out. But that's not the problem that they have in Ontario. You know, the people in Ontario are, you know, I'm sure they have the same per capita problem that everybody else does with addiction, but, you know, not that much. They have a law enforcement problem, not because they're trying to bust people coming over from Idaho, but because, you know, they're not always sober when they come over and things like that. And so, like, you have your problem, we have ours. So we did eventually get a local option through the legislature after I left, and I think it was confined to Harney County because that was where the problem was that they wanted to address. So I think, you know, once you start the conversations, you really can get places.
Chief?
I want to say something that doesn't really respond to that question, but it's about what happens when people can't agree on policy matters and we can't move forward. Sometimes people will say, well, why don't the courts just order it? You know, because it's so impossible. And so they'll file something and they'll be wanting the courts to say, you know, you must do this because the people haven't been able to figure it out. And sometimes there is a role for the court there if there is a law that can be enforced or declared. But most of the time, it really does require that hard work to establish the policy. The courts can't be making policy. So I'm just reinforcing the importance of listening and compromise on policy matters and not looking to our courts to figure that out.
Paul?
Hi, Paul Bowden, a visitor to the City Club. This is primarily for you, Jenny, but it could be anybody. About 25 years ago, I was a public school teacher in 4J. I taught 6th grade, and we studied the We the People curriculum, but we decided to go further and collaborate with the law school, and Margie Paris at the time was the dean, and she helped bring law school students to help the students understand what it was like to study an appellate brief, and the kids studied a number of them, including the Casey Martin case. It was a terrific unit. It was expanded, obviously. It took a long time to do. That kind of collaboration is not something you can just do in 3 or 4 weeks. Okay. So my question is that still possible today for public school teachers, middle school or high school, particularly middle school, to still have the agency to spend the time to develop their own curriculum out of their passions at a time when standardized assessment is still around, alive, taking up a lot of time, particularly this month? Have things changed in terms of teacher agency between now and then?
Yeah, so I'm going to say first off the bat that these are just my views and not that of the school board in general or anyone else. I think we have seen a rise in basically, you know, accountability testing in education. I don't necessarily think that's been for the better. It not only, as you say, consumes a lot of time and resources, but it consumes a lot of administrative time and is very expensive for districts to administer, especially with the diminishing resources. So I think that unfortunately has cut into some of the ability of educators to be able to take something that they're really passionate about and focus on that instead of having to worry about, you know, accountability testing. The other problem with some of the emphasis on testing can be, you know, students who aren't getting the supports they need for the testing to really reflect, you know, where they are in the educational system. And it also doesn't really reflect the whole child curriculum that we want to see, which is more than just perhaps the specific subjects tested, but also their sense of critical thinking, music, arts, things like that. So I think that's a struggle in today's day and age and the way we get our funding. I like to think that that is something that we still value and prioritize in 4J, but I think it is a challenge as we've, you know, we had the No Child Left Behind, and then we've had, you know, accountability testing since then. So I think it's a real issue that you point out.
Have to touch on during the course of the,
And can you give some examples of what topics are covered?
There are some of the state standards that are sort of the basic things that we would think about in a civics class, the three branches of government and the machinations of those. There are other standards, though, that do have things like understanding community activism or collaboration as a mechanism for policy development. So some of them are much more community-oriented, and what this does, I think, is develop, it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? There's no kind of stated curriculum that a teacher can go, phew, this is all set out, I can just follow these guidelines. But it does also give them an incredible amount of autonomy in developing those things. But it is a big responsibility, and that's where organizations like the Civics Education or Civics Learning Project can help teachers do that organization that you were doing. So I do that same work. I bring law students into classrooms to facilitate We the People and mock trial and community action projects, those kinds of things.
Elizabeth, did you want to say something?
Yes, I also had a question for you, actually. So I was homeschooled, but I believe that this isn't taught in schools. When I started college, I took a criminal law class, and one of the things we learned in that class was how to read a statute, because there are layers to a statute beyond just the sentence that you see. Certain words mean something completely different than they do to the layperson. And I think that most people, when reading a statute, wouldn't be able to pick that apart and understand what the law says. And I think it is incredibly important for anyone, really, to be able to read and understand our laws. Do you think that this bill is likely to lead to children being educated as to that kind of thing in schools?
My boyfriend's going to love that he gets a shout out on this one. He likes to say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And I do think that in our discussions about policy development, we often get wrapped up in the idea of it's not good enough, it's not perfect, it's not exactly what I want, and so I'm going to oppose what's happening. I think what SB 513 does is lay a groundwork for us to begin this work, and then it allows teachers and communities to develop curriculum that's not only a reflection of the state standards, but also as a reflection of their own community and the ways that students can participate locally. Civics Learning Project and I personally are very passionate about the idea that the news nationally, globally, is overwhelming. And it is developing in our young people and probably amongst a number of us here a sense of what in the world could I possibly do about what is happening in the world. I'm just one person, I can't really do anything. As you enlighten and engage students about what they can do in their local communities, they start to see a pathway toward agency and advocacy. And our local communities is really where our democracy's roots are. And if we don't see ourselves as participants there, whether or not students are able to accurately read statutes isn't going to be the sort of thing that every student's going to need to take into the world with them. So I think that it varies in curriculum and in classrooms based on what the community needs in that moment. Does that answer your question? Great.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I'll call on Alyssa to come back up and bring us home. Thank you very much, folks. It was a great program.
This has been our May 1st, 2026 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. We'll be back next week here at Wow Hall in downtown Eugene on Friday, May 8th at noon. That program will be Beyond Enrichment, Arts as a Lifeline for Youth Wellbeing. One last thing before you go. City Club is seeking a reliable person who notices details to become the extra eyes and ears on editing our weekly programs for KLCC and our podcast. After the initial editing is done, this volunteer's role is to confirm that the edits are correct and to make any additional recommendations for edits that may have been missed. Training provided. This role requires about an hour on Sundays after each program, and others are able to fill in for you when you need the day off. If you're interested, please email me at cityclubofeugene@gmail.com. Have a great weekend or week, and we'll see you next time.